220 aid trucks, including 10 fuel trucks, enter Gaza from Egypt. Tens of thousands of Palestinians continue to head north to return home as part of a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. And Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon killed 2 and injured 26. Hello there, it's 4 o'clock Cairo local time and you're watching Q News. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. And just before we get to Gaza, a high-level Egyptian source has denied that a phone call happened between the Egyptian and American presidents. The source told our sister news channel, Al News, that any phone call by Egyptian President Abdel-fattah el-sissi is announced according to the usual protocol with heads of state. The official source stressed that the necessary accuracy should be verified, especially regarding a call at this level and at such a critical time for the Middle East region. Also, Al News has reported that 10 fuel trucks entered Gaza from Egypt today. The channel confirmed that these fuel trucks are within the 220 aid trucks with medical and food supplies that have entered Gaza through the Kerem Abu Salem and Al-Oja, known as Nitzana, border crossings in preparation to enter the Gaza Strip. UNICEF has reported accelerating the distribution of supplies and services to children in Gaza Strip, with over 350 trucks entering in the first week of the long-awaited ceasefire. UNICEF reports that trucks packed with water, hygiene kits, malnutrition treatment, warm clothing, tarpaulins and other essential humanitarian supplies entered through crossings in both the north and south of the Gaza Strip and were distributed with partners to families in need. It added that more than 2 million people in the Gaza Strip, half of them children, are facing devastating shortages of basic necessities, including safe water and sanitation, food and healthcare. Jordan has announced it will continue an intensive air bridge to send humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. Jordanian government spokesperson Mohammed al-Mamani stated that Jordan started an intensive air bridge today to deliver medical supplies, food and humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. It will last for 8 days and will constitute of 16 flights per day. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have continued to head north to return home as part of a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. Late on Monday, Gaza's Hamas authorities said more than 300,000 people had crossed into Gaza City and the northern edge of the enclave. Their return, which had been delayed over the weekend, proceeded after Hamas agreed to hand over 3 Israeli detainees this week, and Israeli forces began to withdraw from a main corridor across the enclave as part of an agreement on a ceasefire in the 15-month-long war. Palestinians are reuniting with their families after 15 months apart. Around 650,000 Palestinians were displaced from northern Gaza during the war. Many of those displaced have had to move several times as Israel designated parts of Gaza as humanitarian zones and then cleared them out before mounting bombardments and ground operations. Palestinians who have been living in a vast refugee camp in Qnews were ready to take down and move their small shelters. The mood in Mawasi refugee camp was joyous, even though many knew their homes had been destroyed in Israeli offensives. UN officials estimated that some 200,000 people made their way back over the course of the day. Displaced Palestinians arriving to Gaza last night have said they were exhausted as they recalled their journey to northern Gaza on foot. Some said they would spend the night sleeping on the streets as they had nowhere to go or couldn't continue walking any further. Others were waiting for family members they had lost among the crowds along the way. Tens of thousands of Palestinians streamed along the main roads leading north in Gaza, jubilant to be returning home after months of living in temporary shelters, but fearing what might remain of their homes amid the bombed-out ruins. As Israel's ban on the UN agency that looks after Palestinian refugees is set to come into effect this Thursday, workers are packing up the UNRWA compound in occupied Jerusalem. Israel's government has ordered UNRWA to vacate its premises and cease operations in East Jerusalem following a law passed by Parliament last year banning the agency and prohibiting Israeli authorities from engaging with it. It's unclear who will now provide these services or how the ban will impact operations in the West Bank and Gaza, where UNRWA has been the primary provider of education, health and other services. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians returned to northern Gaza following agreements mediated by Egypt, Qatar and the United States.
Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians began returning to the northern Gaza Strip after Hamas agreed to release Israeli detainees, including Erbil Yahud, before Friday. In exchange, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu permitted displaced Palestinians to return to their homes. Crossings were opened in phases, allowing approximately 650,000 people to journey back. Many had been living in dire conditions in temporary shelters. The return was marked by relief and hope, despite the destruction awaiting them in the northern Gaza. Returning families face immense hardships as they attempt to rebuild their lives amid the devastation. This development follows a truce mediated by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, which includes reciprocal releases of Israeli and Palestinian detainees. The first phase of the ceasefire is expected to last until early March and involves further detainee exchanges. However, the next phase is more complex. Hamas has called for a complete cessation of hostilities for additional releases, while Israel remains committed to dismantling Hamas's military and political structures. Although the return of displaced Palestinians signals a step toward normalcy, the path to lasting peace remains uncertain, requiring significant efforts to address humanitarian needs and political disputes in the region.
Now for more on this, Hani Saif is waiting for us in our newsroom. Hani.
Thank you, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the managing editor of Al-Ahram newspaper, Mr. Ashraf Abul-Hol. Welcome to QNews, sir. Now, with the Palestinians returning to the northern Gaza Strip, now, what conditions are the Palestinians actually facing upon returning to their homes in the northern territories of Gaza?
Firstly, I would like to salute you and your esteemed viewers. situations are very bad at the northern of the Gaza Strip. Most of the houses were demolished, and the roads aren't paved enough for walking. There are no stores or food that fulfill the needs of the people. But they justified to go from this house in order to see what their houses and what they left from their families, and several of the members of the family under the rubble of the demolished bodies, and their bodies were in the ruins. So they go back for several reasons, and there is a dire desire to stay in their birthhood. They may to reach in services while they were in the refugees areas in the south, in the central, in Adi Nawasi. They found nothing, and also the weather was very hard. So the return of the refugees is that, or the return of the displaced people from the north to the south troubled everybody, and their calculations, such as international organizations that should double the aids heading to the north, and also would troubled Israel that they had to partially withdraw from Netzarim corridor, as well as the Palestinian authorities that they cannot to fulfill their needs and to make the matters more complicated. Rather, the people preferred to go back to their homelands, and they might be getting better later on.
Mm-hmm. Well, so how are the local teams on the ground assessing the scale of destruction in northern Gaza, and what sort of immediate help is being offered to those affected?
Let me remind you, and I think you've already mentioned this repeatedly in Qnews, which is that the aids are facing great shortages. Most of the aids for together for only one organization that has a clear plan of work, and facing several problems, as well as the logistics area, which is the UNRWA. And but UNRWA, in light of the great vast of numbers returning, and upon the pressure that they are facing, so the quantities of the aids aren't enough now. They're still suffering, but ultimately the UNRWA and other international institutions, they try as much as they possible to fulfill the needs of the people. Egypt, from its hand, opened the crossings to enter the most quantities of aid, but we should remember that Israel do the inspections of the aids, so the process of entering aren't in a pace that appropriate, and so even the quantity of the aid is much better compared to the past months.
So what is being done to actually try and balance any insufficient humanitarian aid getting into the Gaza Strip and still maintaining the safety and health conditions of the Gazans returning to their northern territories?
Unfortunately, most of the people, they cannot pay the taxi fares, the transportation from the north into the north. Most of them are taking their roads on foot, spending 10 kilometers while they are sick and weak. Unfortunately, for the first 2 days, they threw the road into Netzarim. Some of them were fall dead. And there is a process of an inspection to the vehicles, and some unexploded devices weren't or were under the roads, and the shortage of the pharmaceuticals. So it is in a very dangerous process, but still they wish to go back home.
Mm-hmm. So how feasible and realistic is the ceasefire going to be turned into a permanent one, and a two-state solution being the only viable solution for this crisis?
Let me say to you that the brokers, Egypt, Qatar and the US, are pressured forcibly to execute a full ceasefire. When Israel rejected to open Netzarim Road for the displaced people to go through back home, and they protected by the Erbil Yehud that hasn't been released yet, so brokers intervened to expose their fate, and it's been agreed upon to be released in the past Friday, along with others, in return of releasing more than 90 Palestinian prisoners. That would facilitate the matter, so we bet. Also, the Qatari and Egyptian team is trying to space Israel privilege for Israel, and they expected the vehicles, and there are ongoing communications with the political leaders of Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, along with Israel, in order to pave the way in entering the second phase of the swap of the captives. And I think the matter's ongoing fine, despite the hindrances and obstacles that took place lately.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Abul-Hol, one final question. The makeshift clinics or the hospitals, are they getting enough fuel and medical supplies that would actually maintain some sort of a health service that is being offered to the citizens returning to their northern homes?
There was a priority for entering the medical supplies and the medical devices, to say, on the trucks that entered lately. Pharmaceuticals and medical supply were entered along with advices that the hospitals are in dire need. Most importantly, appropriate quantities were entered to the hospital to reoperate themselves, as most of them were non-operative, and they don't have the supplies such as the medical materials to be used for sewing the wounds, etc. All these things, a great quantity of them entered into the strip as a priority in order for these hospital medical centers to fulfill their needs.
From Cairo, that was the managing editor of Al-Ahram newspaper, Mr. Ashraf Abul-Hol. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. Mark, now back to you.
Thank you, Hani. That's Hani Saif there in the Q News newsroom. Thank you very much for that. Now, Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration has stressed the necessity of establishing an independent Palestinian state with contiguous territories on the lines of June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Participating in a dialogue session at the Geneva Center for Security Policy on Developments in the Middle East, Minister Abdel-Fattah praised Egypt's role, along with Qatar and the United States, in brokering a ceasefire and detainee exchange in Gaza. He also emphasized the irreplaceable role of UNRWA and called for a political solution based on the two-state solution, with a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders and East Jerusalem as its capital, highlighting the importance of Palestinian unity. Palestinians in Gaza City, many who have made the journey back up to the north, have been queuing for food and other aid supplies from relief agencies, but resources are scarce. Palestinians said the number of bakeries in the north isn't enough to sustain the return of displaced citizens. They added that thousands can be seen standing in line, stating that the Gaza Strip needs more bakeries. The Israeli occupation forces have detained at least 25 Palestinians from the West Bank. The Commission of Detainees and Ex-Detainees said that the detention operations were distributed across the governorates of Tulkarm, Al-Khalil, Nablus, Ramallah, Bethlehem and Jerusalem. They pointed out that the occupation rounded up dozens of local residents as it continued its military operation in the governorates of Jenin and Tulkarm. Israeli forces have continued their aggression on Jenin and its camp for the 8th consecutive day, killing 16 Palestinians, injuring dozens, detaining people and forcibly evicting families. Occupation forces detained a vehicle on Nazareth Street, interrogated those inside, and were stationed at key locations in Jenin. Several citizens were detained in the city and camp. The Jenin Health Directorate confirmed services in the industrial area would continue despite the raid. Military reinforcements, including bulldozers and vehicles, were deployed with warplanes and drones overhead. The aggression on Jenin and its camp began last Tuesday evening. Now let's move on to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
The Lebanese Health Ministry has released the final toll from recent Israeli assaults in southern Lebanon, reporting 2 fatalities and 26 injuries. The casualties were spread across several villages in the region. In Odessa, 1 person was killed and 3 others were injured. Bani Hayyan reported another death and 2 more injuries, while Borj al-Maluk had 2 people wounded. Hula saw the highest number of injuries with 9 people hurt, followed by Kafakila with 6 injured. Markaba reported 3 casualties and Yurun had 1 person wounded. Lebanon's national news agency has stated that an Israeli drone dropped a bomb near a gathering of Lebanese army personnel and citizens in the town of Yarun. Earlier, Israeli army spokesperson Avichai Adrei informed southern Lebanon residents that all previously issued instructions remain in effect until further notice. He claimed that the Israeli army's redeployment in southern Lebanon is ongoing, with delays in some areas to prevent Hezbollah from regaining strength. Syria now, and a high-level Russian delegation has arrived in Damascus for the first time since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's government. The delegation, led by Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov, will meet with Military Chief Ahmed al-Shara and Foreign Minister Faisal Mekdad. Bogdanov emphasized the visit aims to strengthen Russia-Syria ties based on mutual interests and reaffirmed Russia's commitment to Syria's unity, independence, territorial integrity, and national reconciliation. EU foreign ministers have agreed to begin lifting sanctions on Syria, while insisting that the measures should be reimposed if they see any abuses by the country's new rulers. Speaking after chairing the meeting, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said ministers had agreed on a roadmap for easing sanctions with the aim to boost the Syrian economy and help the country get back on its feet.
While we aim to move fast,
And that's almost all we have time for now, but here's a recap of the headlines. 220 aid trucks, including 10 fuel trucks, enter Gaza from Egypt. Tens of thousands of Palestinians continue to head north to return home as part of a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. And Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon killed 2 and injured 26. That's the end of our news bulletin for this hour, but don't forget you can follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNews EGY. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.